Welcome to TC Daily, the technology show brought to you by TechCentral. If you're new in these parts, please subscribe to us on YouTube. The address to do that is youtube.com/TechCentral. You can also get our daily newsletter delivered to your inbox at 5 a.m. every morning. That'll include TC Daily and all of our local and international news that we cover on TechCentral. The address to do that is techcentral.co.za/newsletter. Now, there's an incredible amount of exciting stuff happening in the satellite communications industry, and I'm very pleased to have in the studio one of the foremost experts in satellite technology in South Africa, and that's Dr. Dawie de Wet. Dawie, you are CEO of QKON, and you're also Chief Technology Officer of a company or a product called Tubi. Welcome to the studio. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think there is so much going on in satellite right now, and I think unpacking some of the exciting stuff that's happening is going to be really, really interesting. So thanks for making the time.
Duncan, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, satellite has been a little bit on the back burner, I would say, over the recent years, but it's been rapidly changing. So a lot happening, a lot of interesting stuff.
And we're going to try and unpack as much of that as we can in the short time we have today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
But before we get into that, let's chat a little bit about QKON for people who don't know the company. It's been around since the late 80s, as I understand it.
Yes, 88 actually, so it's been a long haul.
Did you found the company?
No, I was adopted into it very, very soon after its sort of birth. It's actually a company from the Q-Data and QKON groups. So it's actually got a very, very sort of long history.
I remember Q-Data. It eventually became part of Persitel, with the merger with Persitel, and today it's BCX.
That's right, which was then Piet Stoker and Piet den Boer.
Piet den Boer, I remember Piet den Boer. He was one of the first people in the IT industry that I interviewed as a young journalist in the mid-1990s. He was quite a character.
So that was the formation of QKON. Those days actually for military and as a system engineers. And I think we kept that golden string a little bit. So QKON is basically a company that designs solutions. Initially, we did it for multiple technologies, wireless, voice over IP, microwave, did interesting things in Africa, like we took UHF data networks and evolved from there into today like a system satellite specialist company.
Okay, but always you've always been in the communication space.
Always in the communication space, yeah.
Interesting. And your background, you have a doctorate. What's your education, and how did you come to QKON?
Very much a Pretoria University, Tucky student, and then into defense, like those days. Recruited into defense into projects, and into basically the development, Arms Corps, part of an Arms Corps subsidiary, was recruited into QKON for a defense project, and then basically a lot changed in the country. That was 88, 89, the whole political landscape changes, and then basically from there I started the journey in QKON, yes. So initially as one of the system engineers, and then MD, and then CEO, and then we built the group. So it's
very much satellite focused today, but back then you were looking at all sorts of communications technology, and I believe you actually pioneered a lot of stuff as well.
We did. The focus always is to match technology and business in a unique way or in a different way. So some of the stuff, we were the guys that did wireless, the long distance wireless links the first time. I mean, there's a Randfontein links, we did long distance. We took Wi-Fi underground. We married data modems and UHF TV. So always trying to put technology, and for this discussion, quite interesting, if you want Wi-Fi to propagate in a tunnel, make it look like satellite. So satellite waves are spinned in certain ways to help with propagation. And if you use the same principle for underground tunnels, you actually get propagation. Otherwise, a tunnel will actually basically squash the signal, so to say.
Right.
Yeah, so always sort of doing different things on the putting together of solutions.
Okay. And I believe you were involved in some of the first ever tests of IP over satellite as well.
Yeah, today IP over satellite is standard. You know, everybody uses it everywhere, but it weren't always like that. So early 2000s, the actual pioneers was PanAmSat. PanAmSat is then mapped into the Intelsat. So those days, PanAmSat engineered the platform, and we were the engineering partner for Africa from our office in Nigeria. So old friends Statler Birds and Piet Swemmer and those guys were part of the team, And we pioneered the IP over satellite discussion. And then from there, there's an IPsat, and we drove, and the whole discussion, and the whole industry. And today, IP over satellite is nothing new, really. It's moved on a lot.
Yeah, but back then it was pretty new. You mentioned you did some long-distance wireless networks in the late 80s, was it?
Yeah, because Wi-Fi those days were not Wi-Fi what we have today, but the technology was there and the access points. There was a product, Aeronet, that was actually later adopted by Cisco. So we had the Aeronet agency, and Aeronet plus some antenna designs could actually do some long distance site-to-site links.
What sort of speeds were you able to get over those old links?
We were like, there was a 4 meg product, there was a 2 meg product.
Back
it
then,
was
wow.
awesome. It was like really awesome. So, and we did for many of the councils. I mean, we did Joburg Council, we did the East Rand councils, and linking, creating wide area networks.
What was it used for primarily?
Building to building, office networks. It was it was a prelude to fibre.
Right.
It was the days when the fibre wasn't as prominent, so the alternative was basically, just after dial-up.
Right.
Those days. So it's strange to think back then, and strange to think that whatever is today so common didn't really exist then. It's like you have to really sit back and make sure you've got your facts right.
Now, you're also the Chief Technology Officer of, is it a company called?
It's a product.
Product called, is it Tubi or Tubi?
It's to be.
To be.
Yeah, like to be connected or not to be.
Right.
And because
spelled TWOOBII.
Yes, which is all of the letters of what's got into the product. So it's a mix of Intelsat is in there, and iDirect is in there.
Oh, that's clever.
And a couple of things. And when we created the product brands, you got to look, we wanted something unique. You, of course, have to get the URL. So you got to make sure you can get the web page and the URL. And then we wanted a bit of a character, because we wanted to be as a little bit of a character, mannequin, and we could actually do a logo from it.
Right.
And it was important for us to brand it as a product. It is the 4th generation platform, and you learn a lot in each platform, sometimes technology, sometimes business, sometimes go-to-market. So most of the lessons we've learned is mostly around go-to-market. And the issue with satellite has always been branding, awareness, promoting. It is sort of telling the story and promoting the story. And we wanted the To Be story to basically have some proper legs in the media. And also because QKON, as a specialist system engineering company, not so easy to go from there to a product or go-to-market product, a B2B product, and hence the creation of Tubi with its website, with the branding and all of that.
So is it a B2B service or B2C?
B2B, business,
B2B, business to business. And it's a satellite broadband service which you're offering across countries in Africa?
Across countries,
When was it launched?
It was launched in actually 2018, and then we had 2019 and the 2 COVID years. So this year we were just like recapping the other day is basically our first proper, let's say, full business year, so to say. So, mostly to address business connectivity.
Right. Through a specific satellite?
Constellation of satellites. We've launched this with Intelsat. We've also now joined up with Amos. So the whole idea is to be leveraging the satellite capabilities. So satellite networks are basically networks built in the sky. So they have a longer synergy with relationship a little bit with from a concept point to cellular. So there's a network, and from that you need to create a product.
Okay.
And then it's a matter of how's the product definition, and we can talk a little bit about that and where it's positioned. So we're basically focusing on what we brand as a smart satellite service, and smart around functionalities and features like SD-WAN and voice and layer 2 and all trying to make it as close to a wire as we can.
Right.
So there's a lot of work in putting in the complexity that actually for the architects make it a cable replacement. Because if you're a network architect and you architect a retail network, you're going to need satellite, but you're going to need it only for a certain amount of the locations. It's not your mainstream connectivity. Now, to bring in satellite into that network, you don't want to have complications. And hence, it's got to be a little bit easy to plug it into your network core.
Okay. So is it aimed at companies that have branch offices or retail groups that have stores out in remote areas that don't necessarily have access to good connectivity?
There's two sweet spots for satellite, and it's basically fundamental in the technology. One has to remember fiber is ultimately point-to-point. It's a piece of cable, it's got two endpoints, and you can string it off, but it's a point-to-point technology. Wireless is point-to-multipoint, so you've got a distribution environment. So satellite is basically distribution on a mega scale.
Yep.
So you've got the anywhere angle, and you've got the high availability. So where that fits in for business is two applications. For high demand applications like branches and sort of high data use, it's a perfect backup service.
Right.
Even today, we've seen a lot of high demand spiking up because you're not terrestrial linked, you're not linked to towers and the tower failures. So it's always been a high availability. So there's a branch backup, business backup, type of sector or span portfolio of solutions. And then there's the primary ones. If it's important and it's critical, it's basically satellite. So it means ATM, point of sale,
ATMs.
retails, broadcasting, any sort of classical. Now I'm talking a little bit of a subsector of satellite. One has to remember there's a big market in maritime, there's a big market in aero, there's a big market in government defense. So they're still on the peripheral of our business footprint,
Right.
but it's also a very big market. Aero specifically, onboard aero, onboard passenger Wi-Fi,
Okay.
connectivity to ships. I mean, nowadays they can take a gigabits of capacity onto a passenger ship.
Astonishing.
Yeah,
Astonishing.
yeah, and it's obviously still not enough because you can never good enough from
Those big ships, no?
yeah, they're massive ships, and there's Wi-Fi is a massive demand. So
Yeah.
satellite has moved long into the feature type of spectrum. You know, the old problems of slow, expensive, and the latency problem. Yeah, that's
Really
rapidly getting into history.
Yeah, well, let's start to look at some of the innovation that's happening in the space. Now, I think, I mean, I cover the tech industry, and my perception is somewhat, you know, we hear every day about new undersea cables being deployed. We've got the Equiana cable coming from Google that's going to encircle Africa. There's the 2Africa cable from Facebook. We hear of telecommunications companies deploying thousands and thousands of kilometers of terrestrial fiber. We know that Vumatel and OpenServe are deploying fiber into our homes. It seems that fiber is everywhere these days, and everything is getting interconnected. So it's quite surprising that we also hear that there's so much innovation going on in the satellite space. Where is this demand coming from? If we're all getting fibered up and the telcos are rolling out 4G and 5G services, where is all this demand for satellite connectivity coming from?
If you have to look at, you've got to look at the stats and the unconnected gap and the things like that. Okay. So generally it's the connectivity demand. So yes, it's a bit of a, I would say almost a bit of a hype and not always in my mind anyway exactly quantified. But if you look at fiber and you look at 3G and 5G, there's a big overlap of the areas that's been covered.
Sure.
So, I mean, I think it's almost 50% of Africa lives within 25 kilometers of a fiber, and the rest not. So there's a big area there. So the demand is the always on connected demand in all forms and fashions. Of course, cellular is a big drive for this. Cellular backhaul is a big satellite market sector. So cellular drives it. Fiber basically creates the certain demand. So the biggest demand for us we see is the people that want connectivity and can't get it, and that's on the peripheral.
Right.
One always thinks that the big market is out, say like far rural or into Karoo, for example, or real. It's not actually. It's on the perimeter. It's around the metros.
Right.
It's actually where the business activities are high, yet the connectivity is weak. And remember, actually the only fixed alternative is fiber. LTE in the cellular networks is plugging a gap in a way.
Yeah.
Yes, we have now fixed LTE and Ryan has got some solutions, but generally normal mobile networks is not meant to be a fixed connectivity solution. So yeah, it's let's say the ongoing demand of the consumers.
Fascinating. Okay, so but I imagine there's demand as well for satellite solutions in areas where there's already dense connectivity for certain reasons.
Yes. Yes.
When would you need that?
It's the uptime. I mean, ATMs is a classic. You will see them here in Gauteng.
There's an ATM down the road here in Randburg that has
Yeah.
a satellite dish
Yes,
attached to
and
it.
you would see 3 of them at the Fed petrol station, different brands of banks, and they all 3 will have a dish. Yeah, so it's the uptime and the high reliability, definitely. Broadcast, of course, from a technology point of view, Steve did a great job in terms of leveraging that and driving that. And then the availability in terms of reliability for branch backups, and then everything else that moves. So trains, ships, cargo, not really residential.
Yeah.
Residential is a market sector, but that's purely gap filling. That's sort of driving that. So we see from a user point of view, very strong business. And then the consumer. The general, one has to be careful if you talk consumer. I mean, we're in a country with, 50, 60 million people. So a consumer market must be millions, and satellite is not there yet.
Not there yet.
So satellite is not yet, even though there are some consumer level products and there's some products positioning for the consumer market, it's not purely because of capacity and scale and volume, not ready to service 2-3 millions of subscribers.
But there are companies looking at pushing into this space. Elon Musk's Starlink being one of them, and I want to spend some time talking to you about Starlink and what it means and who its competitors are, etc. But I was thinking, as we start to look at the technological changes that we're seeing in the satellite industry, I thought maybe it would be useful to group them into the GEOs, the MEOs, and the LEOs, and talk about what's happening in those 3 areas. And for people who are new to the satellite space, the GEO is the highest orbit. That's a geostationary satellite.
That's right, yes.
Then you've got the MEO, which is the medium
Earth orbit.
And then you've got the LEO, which is the low Earth orbit. Now, the GEO satellites, I believe, will stay up in orbit for much longer than other satellites, which have a much shorter lifespan. Is that correct?
It's actually the time it travels around Earth. So GEO stands still relatively to you.
Right.
So that's the geostationary dish, basically. The satellite's relatively position is still. So it travels at the same speed, so it orbits the Earth at the 24-hour cycle.
Right.
Because it orbits in the same rotational speed than basically your location on Earth.
Okay.
Now, MEOs are coming closer, so their orbital speed is faster, so they will have about like a 9-hour cycle, and then you get LEOs, which is closer, so they move over you faster. So if you look at a GEO satellite, it actually looks as though it's not moving. And of course, any dish you put up, the old classical dishes stand still, so there's no issue about the satellite moving. If you look at MEOs and LEOs, they would move, and therefore the antenna changes and the designs are changing.
And the closer to the Earth they are, the more you need of them, right?
You need of them because the cellars are smaller, but also the shorter the latency. So that's the whole trade-off. So this latency spook almost comes from the distance the beam travels.
Right.
So if it travels from Earth all the way to the GEOs, then that is where this 650 milliseconds round-trip delay comes from. So the MEOs are basically half that, and the LEOs are even more shorter.
How important is latency?
It's a big discussion, and it's a very open discussion at the moment because the LEOs are leveraging that for sales. And it's not that important. Yes, some applications, if you have a very old, rigid application, like maybe a banking application or something that is not, cannot be set for different latencies, yes, the applications doesn't want to work. But we've seen voice, real-time video surveillance, over applications, all of that is working over geostationary. So latency is not such a showstopper or business application.
You only really need latency when if you're a gamer, playing online with other people, or if you're in financial services and you're doing real-time trading, for example, where that's so important. But if you're doing that, you're probably going to be doing it over a fiber connection, I would imagine.
Unless you're trading in the States. Did you know that the Starlink's filing to FCC was actually motivated on financial trading?
Oh, really? No, I didn't.
Because the actual latency, the actual predicted low jitter and predictable latency from a Starlink link is actually better than fiber.
Oh, well, really? Wow.
Yeah.
That's astonishing.
Yeah. So although the public comment is always about connecting the unconnected and all this broadband and all this, let's say, that type of agenda. The underlying business cases for them was very strong, actually high-capacity point-to-point links.
Interesting.
But before we go to LEOs, I just want to share with you something. What sort of made this possible is rocket launch cost.
Right.
It's become quite cheap to get stuff up there.
Is that SpaceX is doing?
SpaceX helped a lot. So NASA was at $85,000 per kilogram. Okay, this was early days. Then SpaceX basically slashed it with a factor 10 with a Falcon, and then with the next SpaceX again, and then again. So now they're nearing $100 per kilogram.
Wow.
Okay, so that's a massive reduction in cost to get stuff up, and of course that drives the industry.
And that's made these networks possible.
Yeah.
But let's take them in order. So let's start. I think LEO is possibly the most exciting area. So let's get to that last. Let's talk about GEOs first. Geostationary satellites. These are the satellites that, like Intelsat 28, that deliver DSTV into your house, for example.
That's right. Yes.
Is there exciting stuff happening in that arena?
It is, and one needs to be careful not to always think that's old and LEO is new, so that replacement type of thinking, so that's going to be phased out. There's a provider, actually Viasat. Viasat plans some launches into Africa probably next year or the year after, and they're looking at a terabits per second capacity satellite.
1 terabit per second?
Yeah.
Total capacity?
Total capacity for, now that is almost a fibre connection. Undersea fibre cable. So it tells you what they can do, and that will be geostationary, and they have a strong logic, of course, why they invest in that. So then the other thing happening there is software-defined networks. So one of the difficult things about satellite was always the business case lifespan. You basically need to have a 20 to 25 year view on the market. And I mean, it was like difficult probably in the past. It's getting more difficult because you need to basically conceive the satellite, do the design, get it into manufacturing. That's a 2-3 year, maybe 5 year cycle. Then launch it, getting up, and then it's a 15-year basically operating cycle. So, and that's fixed. There's no ways you can change things. So software-defined satellite's going to change all that. And that's even in the geo space. So you won't have to actually be so long-term rigid in what the satellite can do.
When you say software defined, you mean the satellite is reprogrammable?
Yes.
Okay.
So can move capacity into different markets, because before, if you made a design and you were hoping your market would be Angola and something happens politically or whatever and you can't access the Angola market, that stock availability is basically dead. You can't actually repurpose it, or yes, in some cases they could reposition a satellite and they could do some sort of that type of re-application. Now they're talking about software-defined, where they will actually program the satellite in terms of, and in some cases very dynamic, in some cases very swift.
Changing what it does.
Yeah, to whom and where and how much and how fast.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and also time to come is, of course, have devices that talks to all three of these constellations and 5G all in one.
Okay. So some interesting stuff happening in geostationary. Those are the most expensive satellites to launch, right?
They are the most expensive. They are limited in where they can be. They can only be on the equator. There's a single arc. It's just the physics.
Okay.
Because they need to rotate at the same sort of velocity than Earth. And the only place they can do that is around the equator. On that arc, that's 334,000 kilometers from the equator.
Okay.
And that's sort of it's a Clark belt, the name to a science writer actually in the 1960s that got all this going. So it's very limited, and it's the orbital slots, it's high demand. So it became a very sort of cluttered community up there. So those were the GEOs, long-term, one place.
Do they provide global coverage, or do they only provide coverage over certain latitudes?
They're the best that they can, and you actually only need 3. So that if you position with 3 sort of beams onto the Earth globe, you can actually get full coverage.
Of all the continents?
Yeah.
Except Antarctica, I presume.
Except Antarctica, yeah, because of the look angle.
Yeah.
And but then, of course, they're not so high powered, so they're not that high speed, because there's a trade-off between cell size and cell capacity. Like all cellular networks learned that if you want to build capacity, you have to make the cell small.
Dense. Yeah.
And of course, that logic's now moving into LEOs and MEOs as well.
Yeah. So there's still a lot of investment going into geostationary satellites.
Big time. Big time. And as recently as probably 3 or 4 years ago, LEOs and MEOs was lots of questions around it. Remember, it's not the first time this technology is launched into the market. It was launched before, and then the companies didn't succeed, and business cases. But this time around, the business cases are very different. Yeah, but the money proposition are different. I mean, Starlink's source of income is not necessarily Starlink. And then the big player coming in is Amazon Kuiper.
Yes.
Amazon has a completely different business case and a very robust one in that sense. So the pressure is not always to actually turn the specific satellite case on its own in isolation. You talked the other day about Space Mobile, I think.
AST Space Mobile.
AST Space Mobile. Interesting, their business case also anchors into another industry. So the current LEO, MEO satellite constellations doesn't always have a standalone business case, which makes it very sort of robust for what's coming.
So there's a few companies here, and I might be missing some, so feel free to jump in if there are others we should be talking about. But maybe we should chat about these. I think most of these, except maybe one or two, are focused on the low Earth orbit. We've got Starlink. Let's talk about Starlink, because that's the one that consumers talk about the most. It's Elon Musk's venture to deploy or make broadband available to everyone on Earth, basically. It's launched. The satellites are up. What size is the constellation going to be eventually?
He's heading for 12,000 satellites.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a completely different scale. I think he recently filed to make the 12,000 even more. And they're going to be replaced, I think, 3-year, 5-year cycles. So there's a lot of more sort of a usable nature into the satellites. Completely different constellation.
These must be very small satellites, right?
They are small. They would be interlinked with infrared. So there's a fabric around the globe that links all these satellites with infrared. And then they have the links down to you as a user. So the connectivity would be from your user dish to the constellation, which will then actually rotate around you. So it's not just one satellite, because LEOs will pass. So therefore you will actually link to the satellite, and then it's a handover, another handover, and then down to a gateway. Now the big discussion on Sky is, and the regulatory, is the gateways and the locations of the gateways and the rules around that. And because somewhere along the line they need to connect or plug in the satellite network into the terrestrial network.
Right.
And by virtue of having a gateway, that's sort of the point where that interconnection is done.
You need one of those in every country, do you?
Ideally, at least in a region, and ideally in each country, because it's also about some of the connectivity remain local, and you want that type of angle,
Do we have a gateway for Starlink in South Africa?
There's a lot of discussion. I think I don't prefer to comment on this, but yes.
Watch the space.
Watch the space a little bit. They postponed the launch, so they're not clear to activate in South Africa. They're clear to activate in Mozambique and Zambia and Nigeria and Kenya.
Okay. When do you think we'll be able to use Starlink? Next year?
In South Africa?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
No.
Basically, Starlink has a very different business model. Starlink believes in sort of a go-to-market by himself or by the organization. I mean, and rightfully so, own rockets design and all of that. And to access the African market, there's a lot of logic or benefit into partnering, leveraging in regulators, even licensed players. So I think it's for the other players, it's probably going to be easier to get into the market first. So Starlink is not going to be the first to market. It's the first in the media. And
he's very good at marketing himself.
Very good at marketing. And there's a lot of logic around that.
Yeah. So there's some other names. OneWeb, who are they?
OneWeb is very credible. OneWeb is similar and a little bit different. OneWeb is now part of Eutelsat. It was as the UK government shareholding, and then there's this international banks in, and Eutelsat is now bought in. So OneWeb following a different approach, a little bit more of a collaborated approach. Also high-speed capacity. So we're going to see basically connectivity to business. So OneWeb has chosen a little bit of a different strategy. not so strong in consumer. Of course, none of this is for sure, Duncan. One has to keep in mind, we're commenting on what you learn and what
coming.
you see and what's coming, but none of this is real, so none of this is actually given fact. So OneWeb is definitely going to be, I think, go to market a bit sooner.
Yep.
Address business applications, picking that area type of thing. So
Okay. Then there's a company called Empower.
Yeah.
Which I think you said it will bring up to a gigabit per second capacity to a single installation.
Yeah.
Is this also a low Earth orbit?
That's medium Earth, interesting enough. So they have opted for that. So Empower is a product more, so it's SES Empower. So the SES is a satellite network
European
operator. Yeah, European are very, very strong. Probably the leading in broadcast industry in Europe, very strong, very credible. They've developed Empower, which is the follow-up on O3B. O3B...
Other 3 billion.
That's right. So O3B was the prelude to Empower, completely different in spectrum in terms of application and uses. So yes, then we're going to see high-end circuits, very much fibre replacement. So I think, Duncan, it's also interesting to see the spectrum satellite is covering, from the consumer, Starlink type of environment, business with OneWeb, high-end fibre replacements with Empower. So very much an out-the-box type of play coming.
And we touched on AST Space Mobile. Now, they've partnered with Vodacom here in South Africa, I seem to recall. They've just recently launched a whole bunch of satellites on a SpaceX rocket. Who are they, and what are they going to be bringing to market?
They have an interesting philosophy and actually extension of the cellular networks. So they basically partnering in a big way with mobile operators, but not as a mobile operator as a customer. They want to reuse the mobile network frequencies, and actually, so your phone, the idea, the model is that your phone will interconnect with a normal base station if it's in range. If it's not in range, will connect to a space mobile satellite without any changes in your mobile. That's the big difference. So they plan, and there's good logic in this, a couple of clever moves perhaps. There's no frequency type of issues or getting secure, being allocated frequencies. They have like a natural go-to-market channel. You basically have the mobile networks as your default collaborator. Would be interesting to see what they do with the data cost. And how they bundle that, and how seamless or almost seamless they can do that.
But the idea is then that if you go out of, say, Vodacom coverage area, you'd switch to satellite. Is that right?
Yes, although you will switch to a base station located in the sky.
Okay.
Because it's not satellite. They use the same base station frequencies.
Yeah.
So your phone actually will switch to that sort of station that happens to be in the sky using a frequency set that you will use later talking to a normal base station.
Right.
So
you might not even know that you've gone from a terrestrial to a satellite.
I think they plan to have a user intervention to choose yes or no or whatever. I think the revenue and the billing will actually force them a little bit that way. I don't think they're going to get it that seamless unless the network operators, merge it a bit or take up some of the costing.
Well, we're hoping to get Vodacom and AST Space Mobile on the show sometime soon to talk about their plans. So it should be interesting if we can do that. Now, does that take care of the LEOs and the MEOs, or are there other initiatives underway as well?
I think that takes care of them.
The main ones.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And then there's something
just
called...
by the way, for reference, there's like 15 projects. We're not going to talk all of them, but there's a bunch of them coming out actually.
Wow.
There's some China ones launching. There's some India ones launching.
When all of this has happened, will you walk outside on a dark night and just see dots moving across the sky?
Yeah, there's a lot of... That is the sort of the downside of all of this. There is that thinking. Now, Starlink, for example, paid attention to the satellite design to make it not reflect the sun.
Yes.
Because what you see is the sun
reflection. They painted it black.
But so there is that concern, and I think it's valid.
Yeah.
And it will probably be addressed.
I know astronomers have voiced quite a lot of concern about not being able to do their observations with all this light.
And there are some worrying subjects: space debris, launch collisions, satellite collisions. So all that growth is not going to be with zero consequence.
Yeah. With all these low Earth orbit satellites, and you spoke about 12,000 or more on Starlink, should we be concerned these things are going to start falling out of the sky?
Not as a physical damage, no. Because by the time they get you, they'll burn out.
They burn up, okay.
But other satellite network operators should and are concerned.
Okay. About accidents.
Accidents and
Mid-air collisions.
mid-air collisions, snowball accidents, because as they one eat the other one, you get fragments and fragments eat fragments. And that, there are some modeling that right. can be quite scary.
Okay, so you could end up with a lot of debris in the low Earth orbit. Interesting. Interesting. Now, there's a project called Lightspeed as well, which I believe is one of the more interesting ones happening in the GEO space. What are they doing?
GEO is the Lightspeed is that 1 gigabits per second.
Oh, that's the gigabit per second.
Terabits per second. Sorry, terabits per second. Yeah, that is Lightspeed.
Okay.
And it's interesting because they have Africa very much on its radar, and probably will. It's not much known in public domain, but probably 23, 24 come into that, which is then different capacity. And I think what's interesting then is the volume of capacity that comes into the industry. If you add all of that up, it becomes about 200 terabits per second.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And just coming back to one of your earlier comments and why people we didn't know about satellite, but it's basically a media marketing awareness. And because satellite is a niche technology, you don't see the mainstream telecoms promoting that. And we know about technology, what the media tells us, and the media tells us what the mainstream telcos want them to tell us. Okay. So if the mainstream telcos do not promote satellite, which they're not, then the general public won't be aware of that. And that's actually one of the issues we have to overcome as a satellite service provider. Well,
is it really the mobile operators that are going to bring satellite technology to end users, or do you think it's going to be done by somebody else?
My guess is somebody else. I mean, if you just sort of look a little bit at history, I mean, what happened when we go from fixed to mobile, when fixed was basically the fixed network operators was established, and mobile, this was in 94, 95.
Yeah.
Then mobile came, and then there was a lot of negativity, and will it work and won't it work? And basically then Vodacom was formed, and MTN was formed, and we basically saw the start of a complete new industry.
Yeah.
Why? Because the incumbents didn't really sort of believe or picked up or had this strategy, or for whatever reason, didn't really run with it.
There's so many people back then thought fixed lines were going to be the future,
Correct.
not mobile. In fact, the mobile operators themselves were forecasting no more than a couple of 100,000 customers in the long term, and they were proved completely wrong. Overtook the fixed lines.
I mean, there was a lot of criticism why this technology in Africa, we should develop different things. Yeah. And I'm going to sort of guess the same with satellite, because if you look now, you've got fixed line and mobile. Mobile revenue is massive. So we're talking maybe a satellite network, 100,000, 200,000 users. It's still a fraction of the revenue of the mobile operator. So understandably, they're not going to get overly excited and jump at this. At the same time, it's not going to be where it's now today.
Yeah.
So definitely, with that type of capacity coming in, we're going to see a significant specialist industry.
Yeah.
And then who knows where that goes? If it's significant and it forms, it might grow its own future, and it's very much would.
Yeah. I mean, just by the very fact that the company is Apple, there was a lot of attention focused on satellites in cell phones at the recent iPhone 14 launch. I forget the exact details, but you pointed your phone at the sky, at a specific part of the sky. Your phone would tell you where to point, and you could then send an emergency message if you're in trouble, if you're out hiking in the mountains and you need help, for example. Very limited sort of application. But got a lot of people thinking about satellite. How important is this iPhone 14 satellite launch, and how do you see that technology developing in smartphones going forward?
I think it's important, very important, but for a slightly different reason. The real importance sits in the core. So the core of these networks are going to go on 5G. So once the core has evolved to 5G, then it becomes less important how do I connect with this, whether it's Wi-Fi or satellite or mobile network or GSM. Then I'm into the satellite core. And this functionality, this feature, I think will help bring that interoperability, because to have that SMS working, you need the satellite network to back talk into the GSM network core. So the user functionality, perhaps miskin highly specialized, perhaps maybe gimmicky, maybe a bit marketing centric, but very necessary and very powerful in driving the back end core integration. Because there I think things will evolve. Because we need to get that standardization right. One bad thing about the satellite industry, it's very much not standard. So this network and that network and that network in terms of user devices is not interoperable. And that complicates development, it complicates standards, it complicates mass production, it complicates a couple of things.
Okay, but coming back to the iPhone 14 announcement, presumably other handset manufacturers, I think Huawei's already announced something actually similar. They may have done it before the iPhone did it. How do you see this particular functionality being integrated into smartphones going forward? Do you think it's going to become very much seamless like AST Space Mobile and Vodacom are perhaps suggesting, or are vendors, are smartphone manufacturers all going to go off in different directions and do different things? How does it evolve from
I
here?
think it will. The 5G standard is fairly much there as a guideline, and some of those subsets of the standards, and I think that will drive the interoperability, and then we will see more and more of that. Of course, initially it's SMN, it's like an emergency application. They need to drive a little bit on a couple of things and speed and usage and capability. But yes, ultimately, from a consumer point of view, there is just one device, and it is a smartphone. So if you want to get to that consumer market, that's what you need to do.
So, I mean, in 5 years, when I buy the iPhone 19 and I go out into a remote part of the country where there's no cellular signal at all, will I be able to continue to communicate?
I guess you would. Yeah, the question would be to what extent and at what price points and what function, featurality, but definitely you would.
That's coming.
It's coming.
Okay. Do you think there's an overinvestment going on? I mean, we saw in the late 1990s in the subsea terrestrial, the subsea fibre markets, there were cables built, particularly between Western Europe and North America, massive overinvestment. And a lot of those companies simply went bust. And I think that capacity was only filled up probably 10 or 15 years after it was built by the telecommunications operators. Are we seeing a similar overinvestment happening now in satellite? Do you think there's a risk that some of these companies we've been talking about today are going to go to the wall?
I think we see maybe some of that because of who they are and because of their own business cases. They might not go to the wall because these projects doesn't really need to turn the business case that quickly or that independently. What is true though, it's easy to always say we're going to connect the unconnected. And I do think that goal is sometimes a little bit oversimplified.
Right.
Yes, even today there's only 50% of Africa connected. If you want to connect the rest, it's probably going to take more than just a small satellite dish. So in that sense, I think, yes, there is still a little bit of a wake up to say, okay, so where is this business case and what drives it? And the rest of the delivery, I mean, if it is a dish that needs to be installed, you need to think about the bakkie and the logistics and the S&T and all of that. So there's more about delivery than just making the technology cheap and fast. And in that space, there's, I think, still some gaps to be filled. Of course, it's a chicken and egg thing. Now at least the capacity is there. It's invested, it's available. So there's a lot of impetus and motivation to make it happen. But it's definitely some bold steps, I think definitely. But keeping in mind, big chunks of their business cases are mobile and aero. It's always a little bit off our radar in terms of generally here. But I think that the big business cases can easily turn, or at least mostly turn, on not fixed terminals revenue.
So you've painted a very exciting picture of what's coming in the satellite communications industry. Maybe just without giving away too much about your own strategic plans, give us an idea of how QKON plans to participate in all of this activity that's happening and how you guys are going to benefit from it.
Interesting. I think firstly we're excited to be right where we are. I think we're well positioned to take new stuff to the market. It's been sort of our legacy. And satellite gives us that opportunity. So we're brilliantly positioned to sort of found the way forward. We plan to stay who we are. We're a specialist satellite operator. Yes, we do know the industry is going to change. So in that sense, yeah, we're not quite sure what's going to happen. We have a lot of, I think, capability and intrinsic value. We do understand we're not the mass delivery company. We're always a specialist company. So yes, we are working on projects like 100,000 users, which we probably won't deliver to the market ourselves. So we will have to partner or team up or collaborate or find ways for our go-to-market strategy. But yes, I think for the next 5 years, it's going to be an interesting ride.
You're going to be busy.
Yes, definitely, in a good way.
Dr. Dawie de Wet, CEO of QKON, thanks so much for a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Duncan. Nice being on the show.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.